Let's talk about... Today I'm going to talk about energy storage and metabolism, how your body stores energy and burns through different kinds of fuel, and in particular, how it makes this switchover I've been talking about from a glucose-dominant metabolism to a fat and ketone-dominant metabolism. On the way, we'll also be touching on this process known as autophagy, or self-digestion, where the body recycles damaged organelles and defunct cellular proteins, as well as this process of gluconeogenesis, where you make sugars out of non-carbohydrate precursors to make up for a lack of available glucose. Here's the bird's eye view of glucose burning and storage. Alright, today we're going to talk about energy storage and metabolism, basically how your body stores energy and burns it. Alright, today we're going to talk about energy storage and metabolism, how your body stores energy and burns through different kinds of fuel, and in particular, how it makes this switchover from a glucose-dominant metabolism to a fat and ketone-dominant metabolism. Along the way, I'll also be touching on a process known as autophagy, or self-digestion, where the body is recycling damaged organelles and defunct cellular proteins. I'll also talk about gluconeogenesis, this process of creating sugars out of non-carbohydrate precursors to make up for a lack of available glucose once you burn through that. So first of all, here's the bird's eye view of glucose burning and storage. Carbohydrates, breads, pastas, fruit, even complex carbohydrates like potatoes get converted directly into sugar, glucose, and are absorbed into the bloodstream. The average person has around 40 calories of glucose circulating after a meal. And in response to the spike in glucose, the pancreas responds by secreting a hormone called insulin. Insulin signals to cells that energy is available and that they should take glucose up out of the bloodstream to where it is needed for energy. So whenever you eat a meal rich in carbohydrates, insulin is going to spike. If glucose can't be used as energy by cells immediately, then it gets stored in the liver as hepatic glycogen. And if the liver is already full, then that insulin's going to go knocking on the muscle cells next, saying, open up, let in this energy. We can store about 2,000 calories of glycogen in our liver and muscles combined, but when both of those stores are already full, then insulin goes to your adipose or fat cells. And if your adipose cells are full, then it needs to create new fat cells in order to store the excess glucose, the excess energy. If you never deplete your muscle glycogen and you're not burning sugars when you consume them, then insulin just keeps going around knocking on all these closed doors looking for a place to put the glucose. No one's opening up. And over time, if you have constantly elevated levels of insulin circulating in your blood, then your cells become resistant to the signaling effect of insulin. That's what insulin resistance refers to. And the result is that the pancreas secretes more and more insulin to make that signal a little bit louder, to try to get the cells to open up. But our cells get wise to this. They adapt and become even more resistant to the louder and louder volume of the signal. Now, insulin resistance is behind a number of diseases, from heart disease to diabetes to obesity, even cancer. The final result is a higher level of glucose circulating in your bloodstream, which is the symptom of pre-diabetes, and eventually when it gets above a certain level, you're considered diabetic. Then you need to actually take insulin exogenously just to regulate the amount of glucose in your bloodstream. Now, half of adult Americans are diabetic or pre-diabetic by the standard measure of your fasting glucose levels. But if you look at even more accurate measures of how your insulin responds to carbohydrate intake, you see that as much as 2/3 of the population may be insulin resistant. Leading driver of heart disease, leading driver of obesity, leading driver of diabetes. It's not just carbohydrates, though, that lead to insulin resistance. If you eat a diet high in both carbohydrates and fats, and in particular low-quality fats, this is especially likely to make your cells insulin resistant. It's like a 1-2 punch where sugar spikes your insulin and then fat potentiates that insulin spike. But interestingly, fat alone doesn't spike insulin very much at all. This is where the keto diet has been discovered as a hack to insulin resistance, diabetes, and obesity. In some cases, even reversing these conditions, leading to a miraculous healing of sorts. The higher insulin levels are overall, the less willing your cells become to give up fat. As long as insulin is circulating, you will not burn fat, period. When insulin levels are low, such as during fasting, then fat cells are given the signal to release some of their energy. Fasting and low insulin levels also reduce hunger and increase HGH, human growth hormone, which further promotes fatty acid metabolism and lean muscle mass preservation. Fasting and low insulin levels also reduce IGF-1 and mTOR, which are aging factors that cause cellular proliferation. Think about cancerous tumors. Even if you're in a caloric deficit, if you're stuck in a glucose-dominant metabolism, you'll never tap into fat-burning mode with your own adipose tissue. If you're stuck in a glucose-dominant metabolism, you will never tap into the fat-burning mode where you're burning your own adipose tissue. When you fast or restrict yourself to a high-fat diet, you first burn through your supplies of glucose before the switchover. During this postprandial state just after a meal, glucose and glycogen are first depleted at around 40 grams an hour. A few hours after you stop eating, then the fast truly begins. Then that rate falls to below 10 grams per hour. From hours 4 to 16 after your from hours 4 to 16 of your fast, the rate of glucose burning falls again to below 10 grams an hour, mostly from glycogen in the liver. After 16 hours, this is phase 3, we're down to under 5 grams of glucose being burned per hour. And pretty soon, the body needs a new source of glucose to supply your cells with energy. During this time, the body shifts into a process called gluconeogenesis. Let's break that word down into its components. Neo, new, genesis, creation, and gluco, sugar. So we have the new creation of sugar, and it's making this from amino acids as well as the fatty backbone of glycerol. This is non-carbohydrate precursors that are giving you something that your brain and body can use as a substitute, as glucose, before you get into ketosis. Gluconeogenesis itself takes extra energy in the process of converting proteins, which is why you might experience lower energy for several hours after your last meal, once those initial glucose reserves have been depleted. Your body is asking for the quick fix, if it's available, so that it doesn't have to rely on the somewhat more wasteful process of gluconeogenesis. Cells that are used to getting their energy needs met immediately through glucose will signal through the hormones leptin and ghrelin. Cells that are used to getting their energy needs met immediately through glucose will send hormonal signals through leptin and ghrelin that get interpreted by the brain as hunger. Furthermore, this switchover process is naturally dehydrating. Glucose carries water, and when burned, it is taken out of the body along with minerals. This is why you feel depleted early on in a fast. But if you persist, this feeling will dissipate. Again, we have to trust in the witness of the saints and in the Word of God that fasting will not be a state of permanent misery and wretchedness. Trust me, it gets better. It's easier to get fuel from glucose, so in a sense our bodies would prefer it. But we can and do create glucose when we run out. This is a back burner when the main burner goes out, and it's also an intermediate stage between glucose burning and fat burning. This period involves a little bit more muscle catabolism, but not much. So we can still Finally, our liver starts to create ketones out of fatty acids from adipose tissue to make up for declining glucose production from gluconeogenesis. Now let's talk about autophagy. Around 24 hours into a fast is where you begin to get the largest benefits, such as the recycling of old proteins and junk within the cells known At around 24 hours into a fast is where you begin to get the largest benefits of the fast, such as the recycling of old proteins and junk within the cells in a process known as autophagy. The body has around 70,000 calories of protein stored in various places, both inside individual cells, excess skin, and also muscle tissue. Some of that protein is vital, like our eyes and our skin, but there's also a lot of dead skin and accumulated junk within our cells. If you're losing weight, you might have a lot of extra skin, and you want the body to consume some of its protein in that form. The myth that fasting consumes muscle is just that. It's a myth. There are many other places where the body can catabolize or break down proteins for energy, and we'll talk about this more. And we'll talk more about this self-cleansing process of autophagy later in the benefits of fasting. Later on. We'll talk more about this self-cleansing process of autophagy later on. But remember that this is actually an intermediate state that is believed to peak at around 20 to 30 hours, after which the body begins to rely mostly on fat stores. Autophagy is happening at a low level at all times, and even when you just do an overnight fast, but it accelerates with fasting for 16, 18, 24 hours, reaching up to 5 times the baseline rate. It's cancer preventive and leads to this cleansing of the body. Remember, the body is the spirit of the temple, so if you want to clean out that temple, you want to build up to longer fasts eventually. It's also very desirable as a way to reduce aging. Remember, the body is the temple of the spirit. So if you want to clean this up, then it's vital that it's important to build up. Remember, the body is the temple of the spirit. So if you want to keep it clean and in good order, remember, the body is a temple of the spirit. So if you want to clean it up from time to time and keep it orderly, then you need to fast for at least 16 to 18 hours every once in a while. It doesn't have to be a daily thing, but you could even try to go longer, 32-hour fasts, just a couple times a year. A foundation of one meal a day will get you to that point so that it's more comfortable and easier.